Hello, I'm Ligon Duncan, the Chancellor and CEO of Reformed Theological Seminary, and I'm here today in beautiful, historic Grace Chapel at the campus of Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi, with my dear friend Bill Wyman. Bill Wyman is a graduate of Reformed Theological Seminary, has helped us in the worship services of Reformed Theological Seminary for a half century. And he and I were colleagues at First Presbyterian Church in Jackson for 17 very happy years as he served as minister of music and I served as the pastor there at the church. And Bill knows a lot about the history of this wonderful place. In fact, he was playing the organ the day that Grace Chapel was dedicated on May the 31st of 1971. And so I wanted to just have a conversation with you, Bill, about this beautiful place and about the history around it. The people are just as important as the building. In fact, they're more important than the building, aren't they, in terms of the history of how this all came together. And I know that the building itself is dedicated to Bob Kennington's wife, Nancy. Can you tell us just a little bit about Mr. Kennington and Nancy and their connection to Reformed Theological Seminary?
I'd love to. Bob Kennington was an amazing person to me because of his testimony. The Kennington family was a prominent family in Jackson, and they had Kennington's department store downtown, which was an upscale place. And so Bob inherited that from his father, and he, according to his testimony, was kind of a man about town. I'm not talking about anything morally wrong, but nevertheless, he enjoyed the good life, so to speak, that his income afforded for him. And somewhere along the way, the Lord got hold of his heart, and he had a marvelous conversion and became very interested in evangelism, in missions, in prayer, and then became an elder of the First Presbyterian Church. And his wife was just an elegant, beautiful, wonderful woman on the inside and the outside. Nancy Kennington was just the love of his life. And they didn't have any children. And so they took in the children of the church, so to speak, and they became sponsors way back of the youth group at First Presbyterian, and then they got very close to the Canada family.
Yes.
I think there were probably some familial relationships between Nancy and the Canadas. But anyway, the Canada children became their children in a sense. And so Bob Kennington was one of the 5 founders of the seminary, as you would know well. And he, because at that time was retired, was out here a lot, had great interest in things getting started here on the campus and the physical facilities and so on like that. His wife Nancy died of cancer, brain cancer, about 2 years before the seminary was built. I remember the time of her illness, I remember her funeral, and he really grieved Nancy, but he wanted to turn that into something positive. And so in, I would say probably 1969, somewhere around there, he talked about building a chapel here for the seminary. And he was very definite about what he wanted to be called. He wanted it to be called not Nancy Kennington Chapel, but Grace Chapel. He was involved heavily in the design of it. And there are features, for instance, that he was insistent upon, and one of them was the pulpit. Now, we've all struggled to get up the steps of that pulpit, and people on the front row have kind of craned their necks a little bit too to watch. He said he wanted it symbolically to stand for the elevation of preaching and of God's Word. And he had seen this in Reformed churches in Europe and so on like that. So that's why we have such a high pulpit.
You know, the joke is that preachers are 6 feet above contradiction, but I said that at RTS, you're like about 14 feet above contradiction in that pulpit. It's so true.
So that was intentional for him. And then just all of the furnishings, he was involved in selecting all of these things. And the chapel at first had kind of a pink tint, which sounds a little odd for a church, but actually it was lovely. And that was because that was Miss Kennington's favorite color. And there's a picture of her out in the lobby here,
Sure
and she's in a pink dress and so on. So he came to me at one point. In fact, I can remember exactly where it was, and I can remember the day. We were in a funeral procession. He was evidently an honorary pallbearer, and I was helping somehow with the funeral, and we were headed out toward Lakeland Cemetery. And as we were passing the property here, he said, you know, I'm going to give this chapel, and he said, we will want to have a pipe organ in there. And he said, so how much would that cost? And I gave him a figure, and then we went on, and I didn't hear any more about it. And then a few weeks later, he called me, and he said, well, I have set aside the amount of money you said, and so if you will go ahead and get the organ, pick it out, you know. And I said to myself in a less than spiritual moment, oh my goodness, why didn't you let me know? I could have gotten a slightly larger organ here.
Now, Bill, did you give recommendations to them on what to put in the organ, or how did that work?
Well, because it was not going to be a massive instrument, I wanted one that would function well. I knew that Moeller was building similar instruments like that. Most major builders have a kind of a stock instrument that they will build, and then they will modify it as you ask. And so that's what we went for, because I knew that that would work in a similar space from that experience. So
now, did you get to know Mr. Kennington while you were working with Mr. Ford, while you were at Belhaven College and sort of working with the choir at First Presbyterian Church, or did you get to know him a little bit later than that, Bill?
Well, I actually knew him from the time that I went to First Presbyterian, which was in 1963.
Okay.
And he was an elder there. And so when I came on staff, he and his wife were supportive, and they had me over to eat, you know, at their home. And so he always took an interest in all of the staff folks there. And the thing that impressed me so much was that he prayed for us. And I knew he did. He kept an extensive prayer list and was very disciplined about praying. And so I knew that I had at least one person praying for me every day.
Did his spiritual change happen a little bit later in life? I mean, was that when he was a very young man, or when did that change happen?
You know, I'm not really sure, but I sense that was perhaps in his 40s, 30s or 40s, something like that.
Wow.
But the Holy Spirit really got hold of him.
Did you talk with him about the design of the chapel? I mean, you've talked about the pulpit, and that is one of the striking features when you come in the room. Having served with you at First Presbyterian Church, I definitely see echoes of the architecture at First Presbyterian, the vaulted ceiling and such, the chandeliers, the way the windows are set, remind me a little bit of the architecture. Who did he get to design the chapel?
I think this was, I remember the architect, and I don't remember his name, but I think he worked at the Overstreet firm. And one of the Overstreets was a member of our church. And I remember distinctly Mr. Kennington saying he wanted the architect to use the Bruton Parish Church as a model for this. And so you see echoes of that.
You see that as well,
yeah,
absolutely.
In the scale and in the single tower that we have and things like that.
It's a lovely room. It's light. It's got great acoustics. You can hear the ring. It's good to sing, and it's a good speaking room. You can hear people pretty clearly in the room. And of course, this room has been used for the young men to learn how to preach. There's a certain time that they get to walk up those steps and deliver a sermon to their class and to their professor, and to be evaluated. So this room has served as a place for convocations, for chapel, for other special events during the year. For instance, the John Reed Miller lectures are held here, and but also the young men that are preparing to preach will come here.
It's really true. It's been very important in the life of all who have come through here for 50 years. I do think of so many occasions that happened here, and It's interesting to me, Ligon, I can remember clearly the day of the dedication. There was, of course, a large crowd. It was a pretty day like this, a sunny day, and it was a very happy event. I can remember how impactful just the regular chapel services were. Fortunately, having been at First Church, I was able to come over here and play for chapels, and I'll tell you why I did that. For a long time during the 50 years. And so I heard some fabulous preaching over the years, faithful preaching.
And I've had that same experience. Chapels, there are specific chapels that I can still remember, often because of a particularly powerful point that was made by the person preaching. Sam Rowan, who was a missionary and a professor here, preached a very powerful sermon after his father died that I felt like I was pinned to the pew. It was such a powerful message. John Piper delivered the missions conference here in 2001, only a few weeks after September 11th. And he called on us to be ready to go to the mission field with the gospel to the Islamic world and to die if necessary, to take the message of the gospel of grace to the Islamic world. It was a very powerful conference. E.V. Hill has preached here. Tim Keller delivered a very memorable series of lectures in the John Reed Miller lectures. We really have had remarkable preachers here over the years.
The chapel service has always been important to me as a graduate and as a musician, because I have felt that being in chapel regularly was an important formative thing for the ministries of the guys. And we have men from every background who come to Reformed Seminary who are attracted to the Reformed faith and come, but their church background and the practice of those churches has been widely varied. And I wanted them to know what our heritage is, especially musically, the historic hymnody.
Yes, I mean, I've had outstanding students here say things to me like, oh, I've never sung that hymn before, and it'll be Holy, Holy, Holy,
Right.
or A Mighty Fortress is Our God, or Praise to the Lord the Almighty, and they love it. They love it when they hear it, but they've never sung it before. So you do want to expose people to the grand hymnody of the church, and that has been a feature of RTS Chapel from the very beginning of the building of Grace Chapel.
Of course, we do have variety here.
Absolutely.
We will have contemporary songs,
That's right.
the RUF songs,
Right.
and other things. All of these forms that I think are valid.
Yes.
But it is the historic hymnody that people just don't get exposed to as much. And it's important to me for them to realize that there are tunes that transcend any generation that are really useful.
There are not many songs in Christian hymnody where the author and the composer are the same. And so we have a few of those in the Reformed tradition which are remarkable, and we're so thankful for Martin Luther's commitment to good congregational singing in the life of the church. But that's a hallmark of the Reformed church as well. So that's definitely something you get here at Grace Chapel. Bill, over the years, what has Grace Chapel meant to the community at RTS? You've taught at RTS, Jackson.
Yes.
You've taught hymnody. You've taught. What else have you taught at?
Well, don't cringe at this. But right after I graduated, I did the preaching labs, and
Yes.
I don't know what they call them now, but anyways,
Doesn't
where
surprise me at all.
The student preachers would preach, and so Professor Alan Bodie was the professor of preaching at the time. So he asked me to take some of those to relieve him of the load, but mainly it has been worship or hymnody. That I've.
That's been the what
years.
you've given
Right.
yourself to.
Charlie Winger does a great job with that. I
Yes,
think,
he
of
does.
course,
Well, and you and I have worked together on the worship course and have tried to do the same kind of thing in the context of the course. I think this, I've been involved at RTS since 1990. I first visited this campus in November of 1989 and then came back as a faculty member in the summer of 1990. And so the whole of the campus, there's just a lot of sentimental connection to me. My wife lived in the on-campus housing before we were married. I had tons of, I was close enough to the age of a lot of the seminarians that I would go visit guys at their dorms or in the apartments and check on them. Charlie Wingard goes door to door doing visitation and the on-campus housing. So I'm attached to the housing. I love the green space here at RTS Jackson. But Grace Chapel has always been my favorite place on campus. And to slip in and just sit in a pew and pray and be quiet by myself, or to be here in a room full of people at chapel time, it's just been my favorite place on campus. Over the last 50 years, students have come to this chapel from probably 30, 40, 50 countries around the world, and then have gone back out to 50 or so countries around the world to serve. There was a time in Indonesia where every evangelical seminary was headed by someone who had worshiped in this room in Indonesia. Same story for Brazil. So many Brazilian Presbyterians have worshiped here and then gone back to be a part of the Presbyterian Church of Brazil. So there's, it's not just been a blessing to Mississippi or to the southeastern United States or to all of the United States or to North America, but really every continent.
Well, you earlier asked me what the impact of the chapel was on the larger community, and I was thinking perhaps I would say the impact of the seminary, including the chapel, has been partly in the formation of the guys who went out then into the community here and all across the states and other places in the world. And I think that the seminary faculty and the students have had a tremendous impact on Presbyterianism in central Mississippi especially, because they have preached in so many of the churches.
Our students have been able to go out and preach on the circuit, so there are a lot of small churches all over Mississippi, West Alabama, Louisiana, even up into Tennessee, that couldn't have a full-time permanent pastor, that have utilized RTS professors, RTS students as their stated supply, and even for a short time, kind of their interim or their regular pastor in those churches. So it has had a big impact in that regard. Bill, as you think about the last 50 years and the impact of Grace Chapel and of RTS in Jackson, have any wishes and dreams for the next 50 years?
Well, I'm just excited about what is going to happen in the future for the seminary, and I am intrigued just to see how things will develop and how they will go. You eventually will have a new campus, and how that will impact the city. We've been talking a little bit about that, and I'm really excited about it. And although we will leave this space here, I can see that has the hand of God in it. In so many, there are going to be so many pluses.
Well, RTS loves Jackson, and though we're technically in the city of Jackson here, when you're this far west in Jackson, to most people in Jackson, whether you're in South Jackson, Central Jackson, Northeast Jackson, you're out of sight, out of mind. People kind of think of this as Clinton, or maybe Vicksburg or Texas is beyond this. In the minds of people on the other side of 220. But I think that we'll have a real opportunity to be much more part of the life of the city of Jackson and give back to this city that we love so much, and be very connected with the churches that have been a part of our life. The church scene and the demographics have changed over the years. There used to be a lot of our partner churches right here in this area. Now they're in other places around the city, and we will have an opportunity to be closer to them. But I'll forever be thankful for this place.
Me too. It's sort of holy ground,
It
as
is.
it were, and so I'm just hopeful and should be praying that the Lord will lead just the right people to this spot, and that it will have a good purpose,
Yes,
as it already has for the last 50 years.
absolutely. Thank you, Bill. It's been a delight to talk with you today.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.